So also, as Ashley mentioned, if you have questions, just use the chat feature, and then during natural pauses, whatever, she'll interrupt me and we'll get to your questions, comments, concerns. So we're here to talk about alternative grading methods. And one of the things that fascinated me very early in my teaching career was this. The traditional grading paradigm is super antiquated. We've been doing it since the one-room schoolhouse. And I did my graduate work at Brown University, and Theodore Sizer was one of my mentor instructors. And I jokingly said to him, I said, "Hey, dude, did I like sign up for compulsory unpaid overtime?" I said, "Because all I do is grade." And he said, "Kristian, you're young. Think of something new. Like, think of an alternative way because we've been doing this way for years and years and years." And I didn't like immediately and very early in my career the impact it had on my work-life balance. And I immediately started going through the stacks in the Brown libraries looking for options and alternatives to grading. And the more research I did, the more I came up with nothing. There was literally nothing in the early 2000s about alternative grading methods. And I viewed it as an exercise in futility. And one of the things that Ted Sizer said to me is, the reason why it doesn't work effectively is because teachers are doing 99% of the onus of responsibility. Because if you think about it, we spend all that time scribbling our comments and feedback into the margins of the student's paper, but what are we tasking them to do above and beyond reading our feedback, our comments, and agreeing or disagreeing with the grade? Really, they're doing no more than like 1% of the work. And I view that as a futile exercise that really hinders and impedes their growth and maturation as writers. We're doing too much of the work. So I also, mentioned this just a second ago. I have a contract. We all have a contract. And I think sometimes teachers get sucked into this mentality that we have to be martyrs and overwork our contractual obligations to be good teachers. And I'm like, nah, I'm not subscribing to that. I want to leave work at work. So at 2:50, when the bell rings, I leave work at work and I can do all of my grading during my planning time in which I'm getting paid. So sometimes I'll take some work home, but it's very, very rare. I want to be very mindful of work life balance. And that's one of the reasons why I invented these alternative grading methods. The other thing, too, with the traditional grading paradigm, I call it the covetous lords of composition. The only one who really sees the student's work is the teachers. And I have this expression, see more, be more. And I firmly believe this philosophically, that the more writing a student sees, the better they become. And they need to be seeing each other's writing. Peers need to be looking at peers' writing often. So the traditional grading methods, uh, when I use them, I don't see much growth and maturation in my student writers. I could put an ocean of red ink in the margins, at the enders, and next paper, student commits the same blunders, same faux pas, same pitfalls over and over and over again. And that's why I call it an exercise in futility. So further downsides, again, the onus is on the teacher. In an alternative grading method world, it's like a 50-50 split. If not, students are taking on like 75% of the responsibility. I also don't see students grow and mature all that much in their writing. I don't see them flourishing all that much in traditional grading paradigms. And I'm a firm believer in this, and I'm piggybacking off of Theodore Sizer with this. Students need to do the heavy lifting. That's what learning looks like. Now, here's the kicker with this. In order to do alternative grading methods, you got to equip your students with heuristics. And some of you might be, heuristics, what's that? So in contemporary education, a lot of composition instructors are using templates. And I'm a fan of templates, but I'm also not a fan of templates. I don't agree with giving kids language, prescriptive paint by number language and sentence frames and sentence diagrams and all that stuff. I really don't think that helps to produce organic writing. Heuristics are just kind of scaffolds or building blocks in which to house the thinking, because I just think good writing's good thinking, and a heuristic gives the kids the parameters to house that thinking. So my first like 10 minutes tonight is going to be a cursory overview of the heuristics that I've developed over my 20 plus year career. And then I'm going to launch into like, probably I can get through about 20 to 25 of my favorite, most effective alternative grading methods. So some of you know me from the circuit, the ELA circuit, as the Bob Ross of composition, because I always ask that question, what if we taught composition like Bob Ross teaches painting? And when we do that, we equip our kids with heuristics a la Bob Ross. He always painted with the wet on wet technique, which is a heuristic. And when my students write, they either declare or invert the thesis, and they approach their body paragraph syllogistically. And that's across the expository modes. They never change the paradigm. And then I always say this, you got to Bob Ross your instruction. As a lead teacher for the National Writing Project, I encourage my teachers to get to the proverbial easel, canvas, and paint with and for their students. I provide a ton of exemplars and models. And the way I teach you all tonight is going to be akin to how I teach my students in my classroom. So let's know the heuristics just a little bit so that we have a working knowledge, and then we'll get into the alternative grading methods. So I created a synthesis paper for us just for demonstration purposes. And the essential question is this: should school start later? I'm going to Bob Ross how to write this from top to bottom for you very quickly. So here's the prompt. Extant research has weighed the pros and cons of pushing school start times back. Consider the following essential question: should school start later? Read the following sources and accompanying material carefully. Draw from at least 3 of the sources as you develop a central argument that fully addresses your position with regards to the essential question. So it's very closely akin to, the bread and butter of an FRQ1 on the AP Lang exam. I would do this with a, on-level sophomore, junior, senior class. And immediately the kids are going to ask this question: how do I write the introductory paragraph, right? They're staring at their blank screen, their blank sheet of paper. And I say, hey, you need a heuristic, declare or invert the thesis. So real quickly, this is what I mean by the declarative. You begin with the thesis. So if you take this approach, you're going to answer the essential question in the opening line. From there, you just sprinkle in a little bit of context and background. I don't want any of the source material in here yet, no regurgitation, no chewing upon the bone of the sources, because the student's thesis must be central. I also want to see some tier 2 level vocabulary, which just means like your average run-of-the-mill SAT level caliber words, sentence constructs. And again, I don't know how familiar you guys are with me, but my kids are super well versed in Strunk and White's rule number 18, and they espouse the idea that there's 12 different ways to cobble together a sentence, and then of those 12 sentence types, there's 20 patterns. So I teach my kids to become syntactical ninjas so that they have, good voice rhythm flow. And then the kicker here: all introductions are going to be 4 sentences unless the student has a reason for it not to be 4 sentences. But in all my models, they're going to be 4 sentences. So we can flip that over on its head and invert it. So you just start with the context and background, maybe a hook, an analogy. 4th sentence is going to be the thesis statement, where the answer to the essential question is. Same old stuff, tier 2 sentence constructs. So let me Bob Ross this for you and give you a couple of examples. And then let's pretend that these are student samples, and then I'll show you how I would grade them in an alternative way. But I wrote these just for tonight for us to take a look at. So in order to actualize the full potential of every teenage scholar, the school day should absolutely begin at a later start time. So you can see that's a declarative thesis. It answers the essential question. So look what happens with the context and background. Research overwhelmingly supports the benefits while negating the small hurdles districts would need to clear to make such a shift possible. While there are a number of disadvantages to a later start time, these pale in comparison to the enormous benefits that will be reaped. Everything from academic performance to mental well being, the total student body benefits from making these changes to the daily schedule. So let me unpack what I mean by context and background. In this, we already got a sense of where the line of reasoning is going to go, right? I often give this analogy to kids. It's kind of like the quarterback coming up to the huddle and saying to the defense, "Hey, I'm going to run this play. It's called down 42 blue hike, and this is exactly what I'm going to do." And that's sort of what you want to do in a declarative thesis is call your play. It's like tell the defense what you're going to be doing. So you can see here the vocab is up without, being out of the wheelhouse. It sounds natural. It's not pedantic or contrived. Exactly 4 sentences. The sentence constructs are supple and flowing. So let me show you one more here. While the intent is good, pushing back start times would have dire consequences. Given that America already has an obesity problem, it does not make much sense to tamper with the availability of youth sports, something that will definitely be altered and impacted by pushback start times. Second, with the cost of living becoming untenable for a lot of American families, reducing the amount of available work hours for teenagers does not make much sense. When placing the argument in a sensible and calculated fulcrum, later start times just does not seem to carry the benefits that a lot of pundits are purporting. So the last sentence is the thesis statement. So this would be inverted. And again, just note the vocab, good words, purporting, pundit, fulcrum, calculated, dire. So, don't overdo it, stay in the wheelhouse, but keep it academic. Sentence constructs, you're going to see me and my students doing things with dashes and colons and semicolons and, doing duoines and trioines at sentence level, all sorts of different patterns for the voice, the rhythm, and the flow. Just to hammer it home, I'll show you one more. Philosophically and pedagogically, high school should be a microcosm of the real world. So that doesn't answer the essential question. So I'm going to anticipate that it's going to come in the fourth sentence. During these formative years, adults have a responsibility to prepare kids for what comes next in life. As such, everyone from parents to educators, governments to policymakers need to take off the protective kid gloves and give kids a taste of reality.